everybody, I'm Kayla Heimerman with the latest Foodtorial for local flavor at planetsockvalley.com. So, for all you math nerds out there, March 14th, 2015 at about 9:53 in the morning is a pretty important day. It's Pi Day! You might remember pi from high school algebra. It's the little symbol like that and represents 3.1415. So Pi Day to that many decimal places will only happen this year. And in honor of Pi Day, I thought I would teach you all how to make pie crust. It's kind of an intimidating thing, pastry, for a lot of people. I'm not really sure why. I mean, it's baking, so it involves science and some exactness, but I really think that if you have a good recipe and you know some of the basics, the really only other tool or thing you need is some courage in the kitchen to tackle this really fun element of cooking and baking. So we're going to get started actually with a recipe that I got from a lady named Kayla Heimerman, who lives in Harmon, just inside the Lee County border south of Sterling. And I interviewed and met Kelly a couple of years ago when I was working on a story about a local cook or baker who has a really good reputation for cooking or baking, and somebody told me Kelly makes excellent pie, you should really go talk to her. So I did, and I learned that Kelly kind of goes against the grain when it comes to making pie. She uses room temperature butter instead of cold butter. She doesn't necessarily use a pastry cutter or a food processor or things like that, which some of the professionals and seasoned bakers would recommend. And we'll talk about all those things in just a few minutes, but let's get started. Pie dough is comprised of three basic ingredients. Number one, flour. Number two, a fat. And number three, water. Most pie crust recipes follow a ratio 3-2-1. So 3 parts flour, 2 parts fat, 1 part water. Although recipes will vary depending on what kind of crust you're making. If it's a savory crust, if it's a sweet crust, there might be some sugar or some cheese or grated nuts or different kinds of flours added or substituted out. But the ratio usually remains the same, and Kelly's recipe actually is very close to that. So she starts with 2.5 cups of flour, which I've pre-measured. So I'm going to dump that in this bowl. You would ordinarily probably just measure this yourself right into this bowl, but for the purposes of this video, I have it pre-measured. And then the next thing in her recipe is a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of sugar, which I have here. So we're going to combine those 3 things with a quick whisk in this bowl here, just to get them distributed. All right, that's good. I didn't sift my flour. I didn't measure it by weight or anything like that. I just took 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, leveled it off, and dumped it in here. The next thing is butter. Kelly calls for 1 cup or 2 sticks of butter. I use unsalted butter because when you're baking, you usually want to stick with unsalted butter so that you can control the salt content of your recipe. Since her recipe already called for a teaspoon of salt, I figured we'll just let her be the judge, and she knows that that's the right amount for her pie crust, so we'll stick with unsalted butter. And we'll just, what I've done actually is I've cubed this up already, so it's going to be easier for me to mix this by hand into my flour and salt and sugar mixture. But I want to talk for a minute about the fat portion of pie crust. Most recipes do call for butter as the fat component, although some might call for lard or vegetable shortening or Crisco for those of you who know it by its brand name. Butter tends to impart kind of rich flavor. Lard is a good choice if you're making like a savory pie crust for, say, like a quiche. And vegetable shortening has almost no taste whatsoever, so that's a good choice for a lot of people too. But I prefer butter. Kelly prefers butter. I just think it has the best flavor, and it's kind of that flavor that most of us recognize when we have a pie crust, so we're going to do that. And like I said, she calls for room temperature butter, 2 sticks, so I've cubed that already. I'm just going to push that right into my bowl. Perfect. And we're just going to get rid of this over here. And there's a couple ways you can mix pie dough. As you can see, I'm taking off my wedding ring so I don't make a total mess. But pie crust can be mixed by hand. It can be mixed in a food processor, in a stand mixer. You can use a fork. You can use a pastry cutter. There's myriad ways that you can attack this process of incorporating the butter into the flour, which is actually called rubbing. And so I think it's just so easy to do it by hand. And that's, again, what Kelly prefers. So I'm going to use her method and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is just kind of try to distribute the butter a little bit into my flour so that I'm not just rubbing and breaking apart the same pieces of the butter over and over again, although that's what it will feel like and seem like. But I'm just going to kind of pinch it between my fingers. Literally, the process is called rubbing. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to be real ginger and gentle about this because the thing is in so many applications, butter and the fat in your pie crust is supposed to be cold. So we're not going to work this to death. We don't want to melt it because what you're doing is trying to gently incorporate the butter and the flour together to make little layers. That's what makes pie crust flaky. The fat and the water in between the layers of flour is what makes it flaky in the oven. So we're going to do this until this resembles a pea-sized gravel. And you can already see we're getting pretty close. I have a lot of work to do though, so I'll catch it in just a couple of minutes when this is all done. And it's actually got a thin layer of ice on the top, so I am going to use a little bit of caution when I use this water. But Kelly calls for a half a cup, and she actually notes in her recipe that you might not use it all. And that's pretty true from what I've read. Again, with the 3-to-1 ratio, in this case, with there being 2.5 cups of flour and 2 sticks of butter, or 1 cup of butter, you probably wouldn't need as many as 8 tablespoons of water. So I'm gonna kind of be, go on the light side a little bit, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I'm just gonna start by adding a couple of tablespoons because I know I'll probably need at least 2 or 3. Just pour that right in. There we go. And then I've used my hands for all this, but I'm just gonna use a rubber spatula to bring this together. And you want to, again, not overwork your dough at all, because the more that you work your dough, the more gluten develops from the flour, and the more gluten that develops, the tougher your dough becomes. And nobody wants to bite into a tough pie crust. You want that flaky crumbliness that comes with pie. That floury stuff on the bottom where there's not a ton of butter and everything, or if there is, it's real small pieces. I'm going to pour a little bit of water over there. Make sure that it's getting wet. It doesn't always reach the bottom of the bowl when you're stirring. There we go. Now I can tell that this is getting harder to stir, which means it's starting to stick. I think we're going to go ahead. Pull this off. The good thing is, because it's destined now for the countertop for a real gentle kneading, it doesn't have to all come together in the bowl like this. It can stay crumbly like this because you're going to bring it all together yourself with your hands. So I'm going to be right back while I get rid of some of my supplies and create a well-floured surface, and we'll go ahead and knead this dough. And the great thing with all of cooking and baking is you can adjust along the way. And as I'm bringing some of this up here, I'm noticing that it's really still quite crumbly. So maybe Kelly was right. Maybe I should use a whole half a cup of water. So I could, if I wanted to, add a couple more tablespoons just by kind of laying it on the top. But I'm gonna see if I can get this to come together a little bit more. There we go. You just have to be willing to experiment a little bit. Some people might not be brave enough to do that, but I am. And I still see some bits that are having a hard time coming together. So I think I might grab just a little sprinkling of water. I'm not gonna go get a lot, I'm probably just gonna wet my hand. Just gonna see if that helps a little bit. I know that's a little avant-garde. Probably somebody in the French pastry world is laughing at me right now, but look at how much difference that made. All right, so once this little beauty is in a nice ball, which it almost is, just got a little bit left that we got to get in here. Once this is all in a ball, we're going to cover it, probably with just a tea towel or something like that, clean dish towel, and let it rest for about 10 minutes. Now, that's what Kelly's recommendation was. A lot of places, a lot of pie crust recipes would sooner have you put it in the refrigerator to rest because it keeps that butter cold and all that good stuff that we talked about before. Well, truth of the matter is room temperature these days is not exactly sweltering. So I think it's going to be just fine on the countertop. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get a tea towel, cover this. It's going to be here for about 10 minutes and then we'll come back and roll it out. But just going to go gentle back and forth. It doesn't look like it's doing a whole heck of a lot now, but it will. Let's see how big we are. Yeah, so we are actually, we've got the diameter that we need, to use another fun math term, but I'm going to go ahead and try and salvage some of this to the side so that I can get it to lay over the edge nice. So I'm going to do a little bit of dough surgery. I'm just going to push that here, flour my rolling pin, and see if I can get these to connect. Now, the beautiful and very forgiving thing about things like dough is, especially if it's going on the bottom like this, it doesn't need to look pretty. This will fuse when the oven starts to melt the butter and it all comes together. Now, a trick that I learned eons ago, when you have a dough that's going in a circular pan, is to fold it in half on itself and then in half again. Now you can see that I'm sticking a little bit here because of where we rolled. But then, what you want to do is lay that in your pie plate with the corner that you folded right in the middle of your pie plate and gently unfold it. And there you have it. Now some people were probably thinking, oh, you gotta grease that pie pan, that thing's gonna stick. There is enough butter in this pie dough that you do not need to worry about anything sticking. And I'm just gonna gently press this in, make sure it's along all the sides. If you need to do more dough surgery, just bring this up to this side. You can do that, which I probably will with some of this excess dough that's hanging off. But you don't really need to do much more than this, honestly, especially if you're going to attach a top crust. I'm going to put a lattice top on this because I'm making a 4-berry pie. I think it'll look super pretty when I do it that way. So what I'll probably do is not even bother with trying to patch up these holes because the lattice will probably just cover it. Between, you know, having the edges and being able to tuck them under and stuff, it'll look real nice. So that, my friends, is pie crust. Not too painful, not too difficult, a little messy, but it's worth the effort, trust me. We're going to fill this with, like I said, a 4-berry mixture, a little bit of lemon zest, lemon juice in there. It's going to taste really sharp. I know it's not berry season, but man, they were on sale and they sure could fool me for being summer. So I think I'll use that as my way to transport myself to warmer weather. I'll leave you with a few other suggestions for pie fillings that I think sound awesome. I hope you give pie crust a try. The directions on how to bake your pie also will be at the bottom for the rest of the text recipes. So I hope you learned something, and I hope you give pie crust a try. And if you have any requests for any other food tutorials, things you're curious about or want to learn how to do, please feel free to email, tweet, or send me out to paper. Thanks.